Welcome, Freedom Warriors, to Essential Talks podcast. When you stay for the conversation and you leave empowered, this is episode number 9, and we have our special guests, Dr. Daniel Nagase and Keith MacIntyre. You might remember Dr. Daniel Nagase for the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg Code, and he gave the speech in BC, which was a very powerful speech. So we have two very powerful guests that have a lot of knowledge on this show tonight, and we hope you enjoy this. And so let's kind of dive right in. I guess we'll start with just a little bit of a background on both yourself, Dr. Daniel, and Keith.
Sure, Keith, go ahead.
Oh,
well, you used to do pandemic software simulation, and that's something that I think is very interesting.
Yeah. About 15 years ago, I wrote pandemic simulation software for the Center for Disease Control and helped them train for pandemics prior to the H1N1 virus. So I would submit I know quite a lot more about modeling and simulation and the fallacies of it. And I got trained a lot on interventions and what reaction should be taken for a pandemic. And as you can imagine, the last year and a half, I've been fighting against all of this because the data doesn't match up. And as a result, I ended up joining the BC Libertarian Party, ran for MLA in October, got the most votes ever for the party in the province, and reluctantly in last May became the leader. And so we're trying to build up our party full of freedom fighters. We've been around since 1986. We believe in personal freedom, small government. Taxation is theft, and what's happening is just a function of government, and so we're fighting to take down the government in BC.
Mm-hmm. And I'm 100% on board with this idea that taxation can be a form of incremental slavery. It's taking work that you do and taking away your ability to govern it, and I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, I don't remember consenting to being taxed. The mafia, at least, is very upfront with when they steal your money. The government, they pretend to be righteous, and they don't pretend they're not criminals, but they are. So,
So I'm Dr. Daniel Nagase. I'm an emergency doctor, and I used to work full-time in Alberta in rural small communities. So I would travel around to from northern Alberta all the way down to the southern border with the U.S. And I would go to small communities where the local doctor would need a break for a weekend or a week. And I would provide relief coverage. Before that, I was a full-time emergency doctor in the big city and the big suburbs of Vancouver, Surrey, and Langley. And so what happened recently in September, ironically enough, on September 11th, was that I was taking care of 3 COVID patients in a hospital where I don't usually work. It was Rimbey Hospital in Rimbey, Alberta. And I gave the patients ivermectin, and they got better. 1 stopped getting worse, and 2 miraculously turned the corner and got good enough to leave the hospital before the week was up.
is that the horse parasite drug?
Oh, it's a drug for all animals, all mammals, actually. All mammals, if they have some health problems, it can be used for parasites, but it's a chemical that also has other uses. And yeah,
sorry if I'm going off topic, but this is one of the things with the marketing that the media does. And I knew that ivermectin was a potentially effective treatment against COVID for a long time. And then suddenly I saw all my friends on Facebook start saying, I never thought I'd see the day where people are taking a veterinary drug to try to stop an illness. And I'm like, hold on, this has been used in hundreds of millions of people across the world. And it just shows how the media can easily get manipulated into a narrative. And
it's like saying you're only allowed to use electricity to turn on lights. That's the equivalent ridiculousness of the the statement
Well,
that ivermectin's only for horses.
Actually,
right?
the difference is, and I'm also an electrical
Mhm.
engineer, is
Oh,
electricity is actually dangerous.
Electricity is dangerous. That's right.
Ivermectin is not dangerous. Like, you
Right.
put your finger in a light socket, like you're
Mhm.
gonna have some problems. Ivermectin,
It has fewer side effects than electricity, right? There's very few medications on the market. There's very few chemicals in the world that have fewer side effects than ivermectin.
and it's all natural. It was found in
Bacteria.
Japan, wasn't it? Bacteria? Yeah.
It was isolated from bacteria.
So, for the patients that you're treating in the hospitals, when you had brought to them the fact that you were going to treat them with ivermectin, did they have any holdbacks on that, or what was their actual response to that?
They were ecstatic because, you know what? Prior to me arriving that weekend, the patients felt like the hospital was doing nothing for them. They were just tucking them in a corner in the isolation ward and waiting them. Well, one patient said she felt like we just put her in a corner and we're waiting for her to die.
I've talked to hundreds of people that have had COVID,
Mhm.
and I have not heard one person that was given a treatment by their doctor. And in third world countries and Mexico, India, like a lot of these places, you get a package and you get vitamin C.
Mhm.
You get what's the one with the Q with the quercetin,
Quercetin,
and zinc and
Mhm.
vitamin D, and it's like, here, take this.
Mhm.
Canada, like I've known someone that they could barely breathe. They went to the hospital and they said, go home, and if it gets worse, come back.
Mhm.
And we've gotten to this point where, like, what is the harm in recommending vitamin C?
Right, and quercetin, that's as close as you can get from a vitamin or a nutrient to hydroxychloroquine. Right, there's no harm in taking quercetin.
I got it from Costco.
You got it from Costco, right? So then, where did this idea come from that the possibility that something might not work means you're not allowed to take it, right? Because that was Alberta Health Services' reaction to me.
Mhm.
I gave patients this medication with fewer side effects than aspirin. The patients got better, and because of that, I had to have all my work canceled for the rest of the year. But they won't even say they fired me because they don't want to get into legal trouble and say, oh, well, we suspended your hospital privileges. We're firing you, because then you can make a big deal about it in the media saying that you were fired because you gave something to patients that made them feel better, that made them better, right?
Yeah, and it's this addiction to clinical trials. Like, nobody's done clinical trials on vitamin D, quercetin, ivermectin.
Well, actually, quercetin was tried on SARS-1, the very first SARS. And there was a Korean group. I'm half Korean, so this is why I happen to know about it. Quercetin was very, very effective against SARS-1. So people took, they tried a whole bunch of different drugs, but quercetin, I don't know if they tried hydroxychloroquine with SARS-1, but quercetin was found to be very effective. And the dose that they used in that trial, the Korean trial, was, I think, 500 milligrams, which is a big dose of quercetin, but you don't need it for a long time. You just need it until you start turning the corner. And
have you read the studies that show that people that had SARS-CoV-1 have T-cell immunity 17 years after?
That's like perfect immunity.
SARS-CoV-1, 17 years. So, we hear this narrative all the time that natural immunity is bad. Well, natural immunity is bad for people trying to sell a $700 ivermectin knockoff.
Mm-hmm. There are very few things, like a lot of the things I learned in emergency medicine, and I've discovered practicing emergency medicine, the body does a lot of things very effectively. Very effectively. Like if you have a broken bone, as long as you get those bones back to where they should be, you put it in a cast, the body fixes it, right? If you have a viral illness, you back off, let the body get some rest, take some vitamins, and the body fixes it.
Yeah, the funny thing about the sort of mass psychosis that we've gotten into, I remember I posted on Facebook one day and I said, since I started taking vitamin B12 shots once a month and vitamin D, I've been sick once, in a long time. And one of the top cancer doctors in Kelowna was a Facebook friend. I'm not sure if we still are. And he's like, well, don't you think maybe that's because of masking and social distancing? I was like, no, this has been 10 years. Right? And I used to get sick. I used to get sick all the time. And this is the psychosis that they're in is like,
Yeah, it's very, very thick, definitely. So, and I want to go back to the whole SARS thing. When we were going through the SARS pandemic, it's kind of ironic because they were allowing so many different drugs to be used during the SARS, whereas we're in SARS 2 and they've limited it, which doesn't make any sense. Why before would you allow the, several different treatments to see what's working and what's not working, and now all of a sudden they've just cut everything off and they've got a very strict kind of protocol on how to handle it, which is clearly not working, as opposed to when we do have something that's working, they just slam it shut right away.
There's a very long, it's very difficult to figure out a problem that is so incorrigible. I mean, if the vaccine worked, you wouldn't need vaccine passports, period, right? But they're still pushing the vaccine as if it worked, as if it still works, even though the numbers prove the vaccine doesn't work.
There's a YouTube video where they're having a big health meeting, and the woman from Vancouver Coastal Health, she admitted the vaccine passports aren't to stop spread, they're to get people more vaccinated. And so that's coercion, and that is absolutely illegal. And they say this, and apparently the laws don't matter anymore. But John Horgan, our premier, our premier, I don't know why I said that, it's not my premier, but he'll get on the news and he'll say, well, the reason we're doing these vaccine passports is so that you feel safe while you're out in the restaurant, that you're not going to get spread. Well, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that if you're vaccinated, you still have a chance of spreading this disease.
Well, it's a guarantee that you will spread a vaccine-resistant strain. The thing is, if you've never got the vaccine, you can't make a vaccine-resistant strain. In fact, you get any strain, and if you have natural immunity, it handles all variants. There is no gene therapy, because I'm reluctant to call this a vaccine. There is no gene therapy that can beat the natural immunity that your own body makes to SARS and SARS-CoV-19 and any coronavirus for that matter.
Yeah, I remember I talked to Dr. Stephen Pellick from UBC a little while ago. I know you've met him too.
Yes.
And so he's doing T-cell immunity research, and he's showing, I think and don't quote me on this, I think he said 80% T-cell immunity. And the way he explained it to me is there's 3,000 to 4,000 markers in this virus, and they're focusing on this one spike protein, which is probably the worst thing to focus on. And it's going to mess up the immune system in massive ways. And every time us humans, we try to think that we can solve some problems, we end up causing many, many more.
Dr. Pellick is a PhD. He's a professor at UBC. And again, he lives and breathes microbiology, molecular biology, and genetics. And it's amazing because from Dr. Pellick's point of view, trying to make a gene therapy to stimulate antibody productions on one of the most variable parts of the coronavirus is just absolutely mentally, it's deficient, mentally deficient, right? Because you're picking the part of the coronavirus where it's the easiest thing for the coronavirus is let's say if 70% of the population are vaccinated, it's 70% of that coronavirus's environment is vaccinated. Well, I'll just change the shape of that spike protein. But the thing about natural immunity is you get antibodies to everything. So if that coronavirus wants to become infectious again, when 70% of the population has natural immunity, it can't. It has to change all the proteins on the outside of its coat. It can't just change one little spike protein, then it's back in business.
Yeah, and again, and from a data scientist perspective, a virus wants to live, right? It doesn't want to kill its host.
No.
If it kills its host too fast, then it doesn't it doesn't go on. So what has happened with every coronavirus in the history of the planet is that it has mutated into something fairly innocuous, and then we kind of get a sniffle, and it's a very highly mutatable virus. I always, and again, this is kind of anecdotal, when I moved to BC, my kids got way sicker and we got sicker. And I think, maybe the virus is just slightly different in BC, but then our immune system,
the ecosystem of viruses,
kind of kicked into gear. And I think by not spreading this virus, and I said this adamantly last summer, I said, we are doing a very big disservice while the healthcare system isn't overwhelmed. It's always overwhelmed because of bad government management. But while it's not that bad, we should be spreading this virus as absolutely fast as possible, so that when the winter comes, it's not so bad. And if you remember H1N1, I think probably most people on this call remember H1N1, and it was a bad disease. Like my cousin almost died from it, and it was affecting early 20s people because they didn't have some of that natural immunity, and it was a fairly dangerous disease. A few people wore masks. Lots of people I know, they didn't visit elderly relatives, and we just kind of let it run its course, and it went around the whole planet. And then it kind of went away. And by the time the vaccine was prevalent, it actually wasn't entirely.
I worked through the H1N1 pandemic, and I have an interesting anecdote to tell you about H1N1, because the big thing that was pushed around the H1N1 time was what's that? Tamiflu.
Yes.
Tamiflu. Biggest fraud. Wow.
Was it a fraud?
Oh, don't get me started. It makes me mad when I think about how hard they pushed Tamiflu. So I was working.
Or was it an ivermectin thing where they were making it look like a fraud so they could push the vaccines? I've wondered that.
H1N1, it was a colossal screw up because at first I don't know any better. I'm the emergency doctor. I'm like, well, if it's so bad, then you might as well try something, right? But then I noticed it was over the course of a month. All 3 patients that I had treated, like, I don't know if they have H1N1 or not. They come into the emergency department and they're sick. And, sometimes I see a patient, I'm like, your lungs don't sound too good, right? But your blood test, it doesn't look like a bacterial infection. But, even though you're 30 or you're 35, I think, none of them were over the age of 40. Even though you should be in that category of person who you can just go home and get better on your own. I was like, there's something not right with you. And I noticed that all 3 of these patients were on Tamiflu, right? And then because I work regular shifts throughout the month, so sometimes I hear about the patients that I admit, and I heard that these 3 patients that I saw, they all had tested positive for H1N1, and they all went to the ICU. So they all got put on life support. One was like 2 days after I admitted this patient to the hospital. The other one was like 4 or 5 days. But all 3 were on Tamiflu. And I'm like, that's weird. All these patients were on the antiviral. The antiviral that I was getting bombarded with was the thing to take if you suspected the H1N1 swine flu. And all 3 ended up in ICU. So then I dug into the numbers. And Tamiflu, one of the studies showed, what was it? Rise in antibodies. So the percentage of people who got a greater than, I think it was 40-fold increase in antibody titers in response to an infection, if they got Tamiflu, the percentage of people who got that big, robust, natural immune response, the percentage of people decreased. So if like 90% of people got like a big, huge, healthy immune response in response to a viral infection, and you put those people on Tamiflu, then only 60 or 70% of those people will have this big, robust immune response. So basically, the 10% who weren't getting good immune responses, if you take Tamiflu, all of a sudden turns to 40%.
Interesting.
Right? And that was, I forget what study, but I was like, that's proof that Tamiflu suppresses the immune system and makes it more likely you're going to get sick and die of whatever.
Yeah, and I remember that was marketed so hard. And
it was
I think
pushed hard.
We've been stepped along through this for the last 30, 40 years where they finally got us in a point where they can kind of push us in this direction. And I think so maybe the mRNA vaccine is the new Tamiflu, right?
It's worse than that.
Because a friend of mine did some research, and she asked various health authorities across the country, what is your definition of vaccinated for hospitalizations? And most provinces in Canada is 14 days after you've been vaccinated, you're considered vaccinated. BC is 21 days. And most of the doctors I've talked to said that your positive PCR test happens within 72 hours after you're vaccinated. And the vaccine injuries are happening within those couple of weeks. So this idea of the pandemic of the unvaccinated is not necessarily true. Probably not. I know most people watching this will say definitely not. I need to see a little bit more data on that, but yeah, like
how many percent of people in hospital were recently vaccinated? And recent, by my gauge, is within the past 6 weeks. Although I've seen some really suspicious stuff show up 3 months later. That's 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know people like full liver failure a month after the vaccine. I know someone like fully paralyzed, lost 90 pounds, his life's over. We could talk for days, but they don't. And actually, here's something that's interesting from when I worked with the CDC. So you know how in Canada, they counted a COVID case or a COVID death or a COVID hospitalization if you test positive within 28 days. That's it. Doesn't matter if you died from the disease or not. And there's actually very valid reasons why you do that with a new disease, and it is part of the pandemic science. But this disease isn't that. We know why this is happening. So if there's a random disease that we don't know what it is, and someone falls off a ladder and dies and they test positive for it, you're like, okay, we need to log that because we need to understand what's going on. But this disease isn't that. But then when it goes to vaccinations, they don't do that. And that's a problem. They should be logging everything that happens within 6 weeks of this vaccine. Not because it's necessarily caused by the vaccine, but so that at least we can see if there's a trend that is different. But there's so myopic on this vaccine, and they're talking outside of on both sides of their mouth.
I'll tell you, like a population health. This is a little bit beyond my particular area of expertise, which is emergencies, but it's partly common sense. You don't know if something's truly safe until 15 or 20 years later. And here's why. So humanity, up until when did they start this vaccine? Like December 2020? So there's an average rate of cancer, there's an average rate of asthma, there's an average rate of autoimmune diseases where the body attacks itself. Every side effect, it doesn't matter if it happened 2 days after a vaccine or 5 years after a vaccine. Everything that could potentially be a side effect. Brain cancer, who knows? Brain cancers take 15 to 20 years to grow to a noticeable size that we can find them on a CT scan. So if this vaccine caused brain cancer, you wouldn't find out until 15 or 20 years later, right? And the way that would show up is all of a sudden the brain cancer rate, which used to be 0.001% of the population in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in the 1990s, in the 2000s, and then in the 2010s, the brain cancer rate was stable. It didn't change. It was 0.001%. I don't know if that's the actual number, but it was stable. Then all of a sudden you introduce this new thing that's never been done before into the general human population. You can't tell until 20 years later whether or not it caused brain cancer. Because if the brain cancer still stays at 0.001%, then you'd be like, yeah, that new thing that we made all the people or 70% of people take as an injection, no, that didn't cause brain cancer. But if all of a sudden the brain cancer rate goes from 0.001%, then after a vaccine, over 10 years later, then all of a sudden the brain cancer rate turned to 0.003%, then that new thing is is suspect number one for causing a 200-fold increase in brain cancer.
And with this vaccine, we know for sure that there's an increase in myocarditis in young people.
That's right.
And they're switching, and if you watch how the media has been stepping people along for a long time to line kids up to get vaccinated, and it's happening. Like we can't stop it, and it's very frustrating. And I'm also involved with clinical trials with my software company, and it's maddening to look at. The original clinical trials I was kind of pissed off about because there were only 44,000 people were in the trial. Literally the whole planet is locked down. Like I would actually like infect me. Give me the vaccine and then infect me. My personal choice, I'm willing to take the risk, and they wouldn't do that. Well, in the 5 to 11-year-old trials, 2,261 or 3 kids, 2,300 kids they trialed, and their justification for this is that, well, what's already been given to billions of people, so we don't need to do proper clinical trials. And even that's suspicious, because why not? Hey, everybody's lost their jobs. Canada spent $1 trillion and counting on this, and you're telling me that we can't do a clinical trial of 100,000 kids? Like every parent that is going to vaccinate their kids anyway, and makes no sense. The CDC scenario 5 data shows 20 deaths per million infections of children. Like this is you have more danger stepping out your front door.
Well, I don't know which UN department came out with the study, but they did an analysis of number of people who died just from the lockdowns compared to the number of people who died from COVID-19.
Yeah.
And it was orders of magnitude higher.
Ontario, they showed there was 5 times the number of people under the age of 65 that died unexpectedly in 2020. And like that, like right there. And I like the SFU doctor, I'm forgetting his name, but he did some analysis, and again, it comes down to human behavior. And how human behavior, he's actually an economist, and economical analysis taken to human behavior. Pandemic modeling never does. But he started calculating the loss of quality of life, right? And the average age in BC of COVID deaths is 86. And I have an 87-year-old grandma, and I don't want her to die, but you know what? She's lived a very long life. And I had seniors call me and tell me that they'd rather die than live the life that they're living. And so quality of life. And so if you add up what we've lost, and I think he calculated it in 2020, is that we all lost about 8 months of quality of life. And if you quantify that across 35 million people, it's quite significant. How many lives did we save? And
poverty has a tangible mortality effect.
Yeah.
Because when you increase the poverty, we're getting into economics, you actually increase the number of overdoses, suicides, right? And I see that in the emergency department.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, and people don't like this because, like, when I talk about, like, if you're making decisions about society and you're making pandemic decisions, you have to be acceptable with a loss of life, and it sucks. People are going to die, but where is that line where it makes sense, right? And vaccinating children, where they could have long-term effects, we have no idea. So let's do a statistical weighted analysis on what is the % chance that they have long-term effects. Let's add that into the equation. And even the actual facts, the UK did a study, and they show that there's 5 times more side effects for children from the vaccine. So you kill five kids to save 1. So even that,
I wouldn't even go down that route. This is so ridiculous. It's like, okay, you brought up the UK. There was a European Cardiology Congress, and I think it was a UK group that did a study. So this is a fun study. So sometimes when people go into heart surgery, like they get a valve replacement or something, and the surgeon's putting the new valve in, and they're cutting the old valve out, and then they throw the old part that wasn't working properly. They throw it away. But this time there was a group of researchers who were like, oh, we want that little bit of heart muscle or whatever that you were going to throw away, and we're going to experiment on it, right? And this is actually, from a technical scientific point of view, way better than trying to use fetal cells that have been turned cancerous so that they last forever. This is way better than that because it's closer to a natural heart cell. So what these researchers did, and I think if you typed in a search on Quant, I don't know if DuckDuckGo has it, but Quant definitely, European Cardiology Congress presentation, and it was in the fall of this year. And there was a UK group, they took these cells and they exposed the cells to whole COVID-19 viruses. And then they measured like how much damage was happening to the heart cells. And then they took another bunch of cells and they exposed them to just spike protein. Guess which caused more damage to the heart cells? The spike protein. It actually wasn't the heart cells, it was the pericytes, not parasites, pericytes. So if you type in a search, it's Pericytes. So the pericytes, their job is to supply nutrients, to supply immune system responses to the heart myocytes. The myocytes are the part of the heart, that's the actual muscle that does all the contracting. But they need a support crew, and those are the pericytes that sit beside the heart muscle cells. So those were damaged, and they were sending the wrong signals to the heart cells. They were sending all sorts of releasing all sorts of damaging cytokines when they were exposed to spike proteins. But if you expose those same things to just whole COVID-19, like the whole virus, it's like, oh, this is just another virus passing through, situation normal, let's just carry on. But if it's just a bunch of little spike proteins, heart damage. This should have been front page news. This was from a few months ago. But again, dead silence.
Well, the media has been corrupted, though.
Yeah,
right?
the media is very corrupt.
The media has been decimated in our lifetimes, the last 20 years. I have relatives that used to be editors, like the Calgary Herald used to have a room full of editors. They don't have any anymore. And the media has become a propaganda machine. And I've talked to the media, and there's people that own media companies, and I'm like, why are you printing this? And they say, we have to because we can't afford to operate without it. And so if they don't publish the Canadian press,
right,
then they don't get money. And if they stray too far from the narrative,
right.
And then I talk to them, I say, well, why are you just publishing press releases? Because I watched John Horgan talk and I saw him lie 6 times. He says, well, that's up to you as the public to determine what's true and what's not true. And I'm like, oh, hold on. I thought journalism isn't just printing press releases, and especially when 90% of the press releases are coming from the government. Now you've got a propaganda machine.
Yeah, they work for the government.
Yeah, and the things like that we know are valid and should be talked about, they completely get shut down. And I think we could go far into conspiracy theory, and we can go far into incompetence. And I think there's kind of a balance into what's happening.
Well, I think it's far beyond incompetence. I'll tell you why. This goes to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta. Okay, this is way past incompetence. So incompetence is you read the hundreds of studies of ivermectin, and then you're so incompetent you can't understand the number 0, where it says 0% mortality, or you can't understand 50% less mortality in severe COVID. I don't know how you'd get a high school degree, never mind a medical degree, with that level of incompetence. But somehow the doctors and the ethicists and the university professors and the specialists at the Alberta College of Physicians and Surgeons, somehow they came to the conclusion that ivermectin won't help with COVID-19. We're talking serious incompetence, but there's more. If you were completely incompetent, you still wouldn't have said anything about banning ivermectin, right?
Yeah, and the FDA, I remember when Joe Rogan did this thing, and I looked at the FDA, and the FDA said, oh, we decided to not study the data, and we recommend not taking a horse dose, right? And that's the level of effort that they put into it.
Well, but this is worse than incompetence or ignorance. With the Alberta College of Physicians and Surgeons, they went against over 200 years of Western medical history. Because since the 1800s, never has any regulatory authority banned doctors from trying something. If you were a patient and you wanted to try drinking beer for your COVID-19, your doctor was like, that's probably not going to work, but you can go ahead, try it.
30 seconds, you keep going.
Yeah, you can try it, right? Your doctor might advise against it, but you're allowed to try it. Even if ivermectin had a 1% chance of improving COVID-19, doctors, for anything other than this COVID-19, would have been allowed to try it. You're allowed to try anything. Your job as the doctor is to make the patient better, if you can. If you don't know, and the patient wants to try something, you let the patient try. But for some reason, this COVID-19, these people who can't even understand the studies, who can't even interpret the results, are banning something. So then you've actually got something a lot worse than incompetence. You actually have malice, because all you had to do was do nothing, let doctors do what they've been doing in Western medicine for 200, 250 years, and everything would be fine. The doctors would figure it out. But you have this regulatory authority, which, if you're a doctor in Alberta, you are not allowed to practice medicine unless you have a license from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta. Same story here in BC. I still have a BC license, but they're investigating me right now. I am not allowed to practice medicine in BC unless I have a license. And both the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC and College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta have both gone on the record saying I, as a doctor, am not allowed to let patients try ivermectin, right? So you are going against 250 years of established medical history.
Just to ask a quick question.
Malice.
If you don't mind, just ask a quick question. Was there anybody that you were working with, like doctors or nurses, who knew that you were administering ivermectin to these patients that were on your side and were pro this? Or did you face backlash from everybody who knew about it?
So my side was the charge nurse, because she was the one who offered to call all the local pharmacies to find out because since the Red Deer Central Pharmacy, the higher admin, were refusing to send ivermectin to the small hospital, then, she'd try and find it from a local pharmacy. And I said, that's a great idea, right? If a local pharmacy, I guess, it's a farm town, it's a small town, so maybe we might luck out, right? Because people are working with farm animals all the time. I don't know. If you roll around with the pigs in the pig trough, you might get pig worms or something, but it happens. If you're working on a farm, you sometimes get parasites. You sleep in too many hotels, you're going to get bed bugs, right? It's just a fact of life. So I was like, yeah, maybe one of the local pharmacies here in Rimbey, they'll have ivermectin, which is great, because then the patients get to try something with zero side effects. Now, it's a really sad thing. I printed out 6 copies of the latest meta-analysis, which is a study that summarizes all the other studies and analyzes them. And I left them out all over the emergency department, on the floor of Rimbey Hospital, not literally on the floor, but they call the floor the medical ward side, right? So I left them on the desks for people to read. And I was like, this is really good information. Ivermectin it's a lifesaver. It's even better than hydroxychloroquine. So I encourage people, if you don't feel like reading it, you don't have to read it, but the doctor's bringing you stuff that he says is a miracle. So, if you're interested in patient care, then maybe you should read some of the papers that the doctor's leaving around. Well, I think some people at the hospital, they didn't want anything to do with it. They either read on CBC or they watched on TV or something, and they got very offended by ivermectin, but they didn't dare say anything to the doctors like, I don't like ivermectin because it's horse dewormer. And I said, it's not horse dewormer. It's a chemical like any other chemical.
It is horse dewormer.
Right? It's not just it's not just horse dewormer, and here's these studies, right? Yeah. But no, they didn't come.
River blindness and
that's right.
And
river blindness.
Hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, and the Merck drug, like you mentioned, like it's very close to ivermectin, but it's $700 a pill, and that's I think I don't know how we've gotten into a world where we're trusting pharmaceutical companies again, because and back to what you're saying about the trying things and what are the effects of it. Like trying to inject an mRNA into a child without knowing what it's going to do to potentially.
Thank you for bringing back the child thing. So what they should be saying all over the news is if your child gets COVID-19 and develops a natural immunity to it, based on the evidence we have thus far, where with SARS-CoV, the antibodies lasted 17 years, and they don't know if it lasts any longer because the longer hasn't passed yet, so it might last 25 years.
Yeah.
But at least 17 years of T-cell immunity, which is pretty darn close to permanent immunity. If your child goes to the park, plays with other kids, smears other kids' snot on their faces or whatever kids like to do, right? If they get COVID-19, they've got at least 17 years worth of immunity.
Yeah, and the reason H1N1 was affecting the young people so much was because there were some markers in that from the Spanish flu, and it was spread. And then because we got into this part of society where we separated ourselves and weren't spreading things around so much, that we didn't have that natural immunity. And like there's no doubt. Like I watched a Dr. Henry presentation back in November, and she had shown a chart where there's like 17,000 variations of the virus already, and they're tracking onto kind of 3 different ones. Well, SARS-CoV-1 and CoV-2 are 20% genetically different, and there's T-cell immunity from people that had CoV-1 to CoV-2. The genetic difference between any of these variants that they're scaring us with is about 0.3%. And and talking to Dr. Pellick, there are some markers in these variants that are concerning, but the vaccine's not going to help that. And we need to learn how to attack those markers, and by limiting ourselves from attacking those markers, we're potentially putting ourselves in a very bad state in humanity. And there's.
Well, to put it the most simply, a natural infection, we know the immunity is going to be 17 years or more. And vaccine immunity, well, if you look at Alberta's numbers, vaccine immunity is maybe 3 months. Because Alberta was 70% vaccinated since June of this year. And then you look at the fourth wave. If you go to the alberta.ca, you look up, it was graph number 17 or figure 17, right? You got to scroll down to the bottom of the page because they don't want you to see it. So you scroll down to the bottom of the page, and then you look at the peak of the fourth wave, which peaked around mid-October. So this is over 3 months after Alberta was 70% vaccinated. The fourth wave is almost as big as the third wave, which was before the vaccine. So that means whatever immunity there was, it couldn't have lasted more than 3 months, because 3 months later, the fourth wave is almost as big as the third wave. So the vaccine immunity lasts 3 months or less.
Yeah.
In the interview that you did with the Western Standard, you made a really good point about the way that your body builds immunity to something when it's influenced in a certain way. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing on this, so you could probably do a much better job than me. But the way you explained how with COVID, how it will come in, it's basically respiratory, so it's coming through your nose, and so your mucus will recognize basically that that's the way that it's coming in, and will give you immunities through that method, so that when you're breathing it in, you have these immunities that it's versus the vaccine where it's going through your blood, and it's not going to recognize it that way. So if you don't mind going into some detail on that, I'd love for you to explain that to our listeners, because that was such an excellent way to explain this whole thing.
So the body remembers where something bad came from. So if you have something bad that came in through the nose or your digestive system or your lungs, Your body remembers, oh yeah, this thing, it first showed up in the lungs and then it's all over the blood and it's causing problems. So your body first makes IgM antibodies, then IgG antibodies, and then finally IgA antibodies. So IgM and IgG, those are antibodies that circulate through the blood. IgA antibodies get put on all mucosal surfaces. So any part of your body that's wet, right? The inside of your lungs, the undersides of your eyes, inside your nose, back of your throat, those are called mucosa. And mucosa are different from skin because mucosa, the body can put an antibody on the surface of that wet, moist skin, right? So then all of a sudden, after a natural infection that came in through the air, all of a sudden, all throughout your lungs, in your nose, in your eyelids, you're going to have these antibodies that are literally sticking up out of the mucosa, the surface of your lungs, the surface of your skin. And these antibodies will still stick to whatever that problem substance was. So you can clean your blood, you can literally clean the air. Because if there's COVID-19 in the air, that antibody is on the inside of your nose. So you take a deep breath in of like a COVID-19 filled room, you are an air cleaner.
So maybe you shouldn't shove a swab up your nose and bypass that.
There's so many things that the body does perfectly, right? That humans only interrupt the system. So then if you get an injection, okay, and this actually applies more to the flu shot, right? So if you get an injection and something bad suddenly shows up in the blood, the body's like, oh, well, there's this stuff, it showed up in the blood. We don't know where it came from, but it showed up in the blood. So we'll just make IgM and IgG antibodies. So then you have antibodies in the blood. So if it ever gets in the blood again, you're fine. But you're not cleaning the air. And you can still have a surface infection. So this is the absolutely diabolical and criminal thing. So there used to be one flu vaccine that you took it as a nasal. It was called Flunase. You sprayed it up your nose, right? So that was like flu virus that was either chemically treated, so it wasn't as bad, and you squirted it up your nose. So after a vaccination with Flunase, you would eventually get IgA antibodies throughout your mucosa. They took that off the market so that the only flu vaccines that are out there are injections.
I noticed this year, though, that they're pushing the nasal spray for the kids.
Oh, nasal spray Flunase. So they brought it back on the market.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
And when I
because in 2014 they didn't do that. They just took it off the market.
Yeah, and when I was paying attention more, when I did the work for the CDC, and again, this is 15 plus years ago now.
Yeah.
But there was one year where there was a massive flu vaccine shortage because they were missing one of the agents that they needed to do, and it was the lowest flu season on record until last year. And then last year they were really pumping the flu vaccine again. And if you watch the government site, most of the cases were vaccine cases.
So do you know why so how many years ago was this? Was this around 2015 to 2018?
Before H1N1. So
okay. So this is what. Yeah. So a low flu vaccination year had the lowest flu cases. Yes. I'll tell you why. Because anyone who got the flu naturally, they had IgA antibodies. When Vancouver Coastal Health they tried to institute a flu vaccine mandate where everyone had to get the injection of the flu vaccine. You look at the stats because StatsCan has a site. It's weird. It's like www.150.statscan.gc.ca. And you can pick the province. So you pick BC and you look at the overall mortality rate. It didn't get lower after Vancouver Coastal Health instituted their attempted flu vaccine mandate, right? It actually just steadily got higher, which is what you would expect. But the thing is, if you got the flu vaccine, you probably aren't going to feel very sick with the flu, because when the flu virus tries to multiply in the blood, there's already a bunch of antibodies there. But if you got the injection flu vaccine, if those flu viruses stick to the inside of your nose, the inside of your eyes, the inside of your lungs, and they don't get into the blood, they're still home free because the body never got a natural flu infection. So the people who got the flu vaccine are the super spreaders. They're spreading because they can still multiply the flu in their mucosa cells.
Yeah, and that's what's happening now too. I remember actually the last time I had a serious illness, I think I've only had flu once in my life. It was 2017, and I was down for 2 weeks minimum, and I went back to work, and somebody tried to shake my hand, and I'm like, no, I just recovered from something really, really bad. He's like, no, it's fine. I got the flu vaccine. I'll shake your hand, right? And then it's 30% effective, and they think they're immune. And this is what's happening now too, because I have letters from Interior Health, the head of Interior Health, telling parents if they get their kids 2 shots, this was last August, that they will be fully immune by the time they go back to school. So they're blatantly lying to people, saying that they're going to have immunity. So then people are like, oh, I got my shot. Like I can just go and I can start spitting on people again like we used to, and they're spreading it. And of course they know this, right? And so they're not incompetent, as you say.
This is beyond incompetence. I think it's malice.
Yeah, and so they know this. My point about the incompetence, and I like to bring this analogy, is because Fauci is admitted to lying, Henry's admitted to lying. They're like, well, yeah, we said 60 to 70% of vaccination for herd immunity, because if we said 90% right away, you wouldn't have got vaccinated. And once you submit that the government will lie to protect you, right? They think they know how to protect me. They don't know me. They think that they know that. You can't trust anything that they say. They will lie for their own personal gain. They will lie for their egos, and they will lie for
power,
the greater good, to try to protect us. But they don't know. I think a lot of the doctors out there, they think that this vaccine is going to save us. It's not.
No.
There's no chance
you
that it is.
You can't have herd immunity from a vaccine. No. You can get herd immunity if all the healthy people in your population have natural immunity. So the only proven herd immunity has been from natural immunity.
With what you're explaining, I gotta ask, like, it's very plain English explanations that you're giving as to why this jab basically won't give you kind of the immunities that we need for this. So why do you think that there are doctors out there who are believing this? If they're just as informed as, we would hope them to be, given that they're giving us medical advice, why do you think that they've fallen for this, or that they're parroting this kind of talking point at this point?
Because they're following orders, or they're just not using their brains. Because this is stuff I learned even before medical school, right? Anyone with a first-year biology degree, you don't even have to have a biology degree. You can just pass first-year biology. You should know about IgM, IgG, and IgA. And once you know about IgG, IgM, and IgA, you know, if you apply that knowledge, that an injection will not give you IgA, which is the type of antibody that prevents infection, that actually clears the air literally. And then, like, let's think about, like, evolution, right? In Ontario, you guys learn about evolution in high school? You guys should. You guys have, like, grade 13, right? So yeah. Everyone should.
We have grade 12 now, but yes, yes, we were taught evolution. I went to a Catholic school, and it was, in there. But yeah, it was.
You don't need to believe the whole story of evolution. You just need to understand the system, because it's a beautiful system. It says every living thing adapts to its environment, right? And so with coronavirus, the environment for the coronavirus doesn't care about forests or anything, right? It just cares about people, because that's what it lives on. It lives on people. So if the environment for the coronavirus is only 10% vaccinated, the coronavirus is going to be like, whatever, 90% of my environment has no vaccine, so I'm just going to keep on being my usual self. But then if you try to do something mentally deficient, like try to vaccinate 70% of the coronavirus's environment, then the coronavirus is like, oh, well, 70% of my world has like vaccine antibodies.
And,
maybe I should become resistant.
And keep people alive that shouldn't be kept alive too, which allows the virus to mutate.
So yeah, an incomplete immune response also drives evolution. That's like university level. We don't even need to get that complicated. So so that's like the first level of high school level evolution. You should understand that if you change an organism's entire environment, that organism's going to adapt. And for something that reproduces like thousands of times a minute, it's going to adapt within weeks, right? So then what is this vaccine supposedly doing? It's an mRNA that's getting your body to manufacture a bunch of spike proteins, and then your body's supposed to have an immune response to a spike protein. Well, a spike protein is just one tiny bit on the outside of the coronavirus, right? So then the coronavirus is like, oh, beauty, 70% of my environment has antibodies to the spike protein. Well, why don't I just use another spike protein? And that's what it does. Because all it has to do is change that one spike protein and it's back in business. For a coronavirus, it's literally easier than changing the color of your socks. But a natural immunity where you have antibodies to the spike protein, N protein, and if you digest the mucus that accumulates all the dust you breathe in the air, you're going to even have antibodies to the inside of the coronavirus. So if you have antibodies to everything on the outside of the coronavirus, you have antibodies to the inside of the coronavirus. Is that coronavirus going to be able to change its entire coat and its innards all at once within a couple of weeks? No, that's too much. It can't get away from natural immunity, because natural immunity is multiple sites of attack. Spike protein, N protein, proteins we don't even know about. But the minute you put some kind of vaccine in the environment where it's 70% of the environment and it's just this one tiny nubbin, easy as cake for the coronavirus to get.
And I think, so to your question, Jessica, where you asked, why are the doctors doing this? And I think when we were talking earlier, it kind of stuck out to me. It said in your medical degree, there was a lot of foundational work that happened, but then like the latter third of the degree is all about trying to figure out which drug is the best thing to prescribe. And I think we've gotten to this place where the drug companies have so much power and control, and we're in this reactionary healthcare system, and doctors are overworked. Canada, the GP practice is completely messed up. They don't have an ability to treat their patients well. They don't have an ability to make money the way other professions do. So they end up trying to make money by pumping too many patients through. And the whole system is kind of messed up. And so you have a lot of doctors who don't have the ability for cognitive thought, and they're just doing what they're told because they don't know any better.
Well, a lot of doctors should know better.
They should.
And I actually, interestingly enough, I met a lot of doctors working in rural Alberta who are from South Africa, and they all know about ivermectin. They're like, yeah, I gave it all the time when I was in South Africa. But you know what threat is being held over doctors right now? It's that, if you give ivermectin, if you give something that you know that works, that's cheap as chips, cheaper than potato chips, that you lose your license, right? And that means you don't get to see your cancer patient for follow-up. You don't get to see your diabetes patient for follow-up. You don't get to see your favorite patients for follow-up because you no longer have a medical license and you're no longer allowed to work.
Yeah, we're in a sick care system where the only way they make money is by seeing their patients. And a friend of mine, his uncle is a South African doctor here in West Kelowna, and he said there was a $10 user fee in South Africa, and he would see 40 patients a day. But all 40 of those patients were patients that he needed to see. Mm-hmm. He's here in Canada, and he sees 110 patients a day, and most of them don't need to be in there at all. And my mom's a retired pharmacist, and the trip to the pharmacy was, it's just part of their social thing, and going to the walk-in clinic is part of their social thing too. And so that's a fundamental flaw in our society. We need to have more ways for them to interact. But so the government's trying to save money in the healthcare system because they're not very good at running a business, and healthcare is a business. And we end up in this kind of a messy situation where they don't have time to think.
Well, I think part of it is healthcare has been used as a tool by government to make people dependent.
Yes.
It's not that you've got it within you to manage 99% of your body. It's like you got to get someone else to manage your body for you, which I disagree with. I only want to see people if they've got a broken leg, because that I can fix. And this is this is my emergency department bias. I don't actually want to see patients if they have something that they can fix. So like, I'm upset because I got in a fight with my boyfriend. I think he's going to dump me, right? And I'm anxious because, there's this other girl, and I'm like, right? And I was like, so what do you want from me? He's like, I'm feeling anxious. I want a pill to make it better. And I'm like, but yeah, you realize the pill for anxiety, the one that works right away, the Ativan that you want, it's addictive, right? And they're like, I need it now. And I'm like, sure you, this is sometimes people who should have gone through their high school years, been challenged, overcome the challenges, because high school and puberty is not fun. It's supposed to make you who you are. Those are challenges and difficulties, because when you get over them, you become a better person and a stronger person. And then if you're, for some reason, taking something that's within the normal spectrum of human development, and all of a sudden you're turning it into a disease, like being anxious is a disease. No, you're supposed to feel anxious. And getting over anxiety and doing something healthy, going out playing soccer, basketball, or just going outside, spending time in the sun. These are things that people shouldn't be going to a doctor to fix that, right?
Yeah, and we've gotten into this place in our society where the healthcare system knows how to do it. There's a pill for that. There's a pill for this. And
so then now we're getting into deep philosophy here. Was that by accident or was that intentional? Are anxious, dependent people, are they the type of people that are easy to govern? Or are strong, independent people who face their challenges, and then they get stronger because they felt, they worked through a depressing situation. They worked through an anxious situation. They worked through a fearful situation. And they made friends doing it. Are those people easy to govern? They're like, no, I don't need a government to tell me what to do. I've got friends. I've got community. I govern myself because I have self-esteem. Are people with self-esteem easy to govern? No, because they do what's right.
Yeah, and it's very, very common in libertarian circles. The good times, they create weak men.
And that's going back to ancient history.
And we're in a time of very, very weak men and women. And we're in a place where they can take, there's no coincidence that a lot of this is happening when, how many World War II veterans are alive now?
Exactly.
There's a handful of them. This has all been done before. It's a really good book called Feardom by Connor Boyack. They also write a bunch of children's books called The Tuttle Twins, which really teach children real things. And if you look back in history, this has been done so many times, right? Go back to it's very U.S. focused, but the French Revolution was used as a fear thing. Abraham Lincoln stopped the media and used fear to push his agenda, which might have been a good agenda, might not have been. But then you look back to 9/11, H1N1, Iraq 1, Iraq 2. Every time that we kind of get into this place in human history where we kind of get this abundance and we get a little bit of freedom, suddenly we get shut down. And 9/11 is one that I always really, really think about too, because there was a lot of really good things happening there. And we went into a state of fear as humanity in North America for a better part of a decade, to the point where we can't take a water bottle on an airplane anymore. And that, the book goes into it, but like the Patriot Act was already written. It was passed immediately after 9/11. Like they're just waiting for this thing. And I think, whether the disease was manufactured in a China lab, I think it's probably manufactured in Winnipeg, if I'm going to bet money on it. But they use this opportunity to maintain control. And I go back to what I said before. Socialists think we're inherently evil when we need to be controlled, whereas freedom-minded people think people are inherently good. And I think we need to give the freedom back to the people. And these one-dimensional, and that's who these government officials are. They're one-dimensional. They actually have no personality. We need to take it back from them and tell them enough.
So what you were what you're referring to is called the Hegelian dialect, when you have basically an end result that is sought, and you set up the situation in which to then have that end result occur. But it seems like the natural progression of things. And so so all of these are combining. It's like you have so many different things, and they're all kind of coming to a head in the way that they're combining. And so you have people like with Dr. Daniel, what you're saying basically about people coming to you with emotional issues, where they're looking for chemical solutions to reality problems, and then it's these almost like ready to go bills and laws that are oh my God, well, we have this ready right here. What a coincidence. And it's just, this definitely has the full all the hallmarks of this basically Hegelian dialect of being set up. And so they want people to be sick. They want people to be eating out of their hand, to be looking for solutions when they can't possibly create their own, because we're not taught those solutions in school, and how to handle ourselves emotionally, how to deal with conflict properly. And so we look for these solutions, and you're gonna get pills that are gonna make you sicker. You're gonna have food that makes you sicker, and then you have the hospital system determining whether or not you're going to get health based off of maybe social credit, or who knows where this is going to head in that regard, where now it's like, unless you're a good person to what the government has deemed you to be a good person, you're not going to get access to potentially life-saving medicine that could have been prevented in the first place had you had the tools in place to live a healthy lifestyle. But it's just so yes, you're exactly right. Just to ask a quick question too, and not to bring this all the way back to the ivermectin, but I was just curious, you'd mentioned before how difficult it was to get a hold of it. And do you by any chance know of a way to get a hold of it now? I'd imagine that they were really cracking the whip on people being able to get it. But I've had a number of people approach me kind of being like, where would I even go about getting it if it's been so difficult in Canada? So do you by chance know of how to go about that, if that's a thing? Yes.
I have the bottle that I bought from the pharmacist, right? That was back in Rimbey. I still have that bottle. But yeah, these days, I don't know where you're going to get it. I've heard stories. I haven't been able to verify, but some people who've tried to import ivermectin from Indonesia or Thailand, they've had their entire shipment seized and destroyed by Customs Canada.
Yeah.
Like, not just seized, it's actually seized and destroyed. So,
yes,
understandably, this person who contacted me, who bought over 1,000 doses, they were pretty upset. It's like, fine, you can seize the property, put it in whatever, quarantine, and then we can make a legal fight so I can get my property back. But no, they destroyed it. Destroyed. So the money and the power and the motivation to prevent access to this medication is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like, it's
I've basically heard of like almost like black market groups right now, where they're just going through friends that live in America, or it's like somebody who knows somebody. I mean, this reminds me of like my teens, when you're trying to get like mushrooms, for God's sakes. Like, it's just
Canada.
Yeah, mushrooms are easier to get now. So it's just what kind of a backward world is this, where it's like, you're trying to get, I don't know, many use case ivermectin type things that have billions of people across the planet using it, and you can't, it's just ridiculous. So yeah, so I thought I'd throw that out there because again, I'm sure that we have lots of listeners that are going to be kind of wondering like, well, where can I get this? I don't want to call it a miracle drug by any means, but this preventative measure that could potentially keep me from the hospital sinking their claws into me and putting me on a ventilator or something stupid. So
yeah, and if you do get it from the vet, just make sure to look at the dosage.
yeah, yes.
Again, it's not medical advice.
No, but the other thing that I want people to understand is I don't want people to get into this, in a sense, the fear mindset can be really easily misused. Mm-hmm. It's like, I was worried about coronavirus, now I'm worried about getting ivermectin, right? But if you take it back a step, the actual problem is the fear. Because what did the government use to take away your freedoms, take away your business, right? Take away your right to not have your body violated by an experiment based on deceptive information, right? Because they don't know what the cancer rate is. What was the excuse used to take that away from you? It was actually your own fear.
Yeah, and that's actually something that is important, I think, for all of us on this side of things, because I've been fighting on this for a year and a half. I hit major burnout a couple of weeks, and was very active on social media, and I've kind of switched back to in-person things. And I've said this a lot over the years too, is and again, I appreciate Donald Trump more than I did 5 or 6 years ago, but back in the day, it was kind of like everyone's like, Trump's going to destroy the world. And I was like, honestly, can you do anything about it? And if you can't, kind of move past it and get on with your life. And I think part of what they're doing is to try to get us into that fear mindset. Mm-hmm. And especially those of us that are freedom fighters, they want us to leave the country. They want us to show ourselves and show our true colors. And so, if we're going to kind of play the long game, I think we're actually in about step 1 of step 10 of some very serious stuff. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. And again, with the ivermectin stuff, most of us don't need it. Again, most of us are, 80 to 90% of us are going to recover. Mm-hmm. Well, 99% of us are going to recover from it unless you're very old and have comorbidities. So it's actually not something to be afraid of at all. And if you do get it, well, let's start with vitamin C, vitamin D, quercetin, and zinc. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't work, well, then ivermectin.
Or you can try natural stuff.
Yeah.
Cedar bark tea has lots of vitamin C. It might have a lot of other stuff. Right? I don't know. I have neither seen proof nor not proof. But if somebody wants to try, then I can't see any harm in, getting cedar bark tea. If that works, then you go ahead, take it. Right? And then tell me about it, because I want to know. Right?
And then we were talking about this earlier. It's like, it kind of seems like the COVID narrative is starting to kind of wane a little bit. And it's like, hey, this is a good thing. And it certainly isn't, because, for me, this has always been part of the climate change play. Mm-hmm. And right from the beginning, 2 months, all factories were shut down. Nobody was driving. There's a big climate conference going on in Glasgow this week for 2 weeks. John Horgan has said words like, we're going to treat the climate crisis like we did the pandemic crisis. Justin Trudeau has said those same words. Unfortunately, watched Greta Thunberg say something 6 or 7 months ago. She said the same words. And when they're all saying the same words, what's going to happen next? There's supply chain problems that are happening. Mm-hmm. There's a imaginary supply chain problem, imaginary energy crisis. And the next thing that we need to watch out for, let's not stop thinking about the coronavirus and the injections, but mm-hmm. I think we're getting set up for a very big climate lockdown, and people are going to walk all over it, and they're going to think that we have to diminish our lives to save the planet, which, again, like an organism, the planet can save itself.
Let me end on a spiritual and also a very hopeful note. Nature's actually on our side. objectively and scientifically speaking. And I'll tell you why. All it takes is observation and a little bit of thought. No matter what this Wuhan virus started off as, whatever, it was like supposed to be the deadliest thing, whatever, 50 years of DARPA research, international biolabs, right? Whatever it started off as. If you left nature alone, doesn't matter how bad the virus is, nature will always turn the virus and make it mild. It might become more infectious, but no matter how deadly it starts off as, nature will always fix the problem, right? And actually, as people, we are a part of nature. Nature has no interest in eradicating humans, in spite of whoever the media darlings are, right? Nature is always on the side of life. It's kind of weird, but it is, right? Even if you eradicated every living thing on this planet in some kind of holocaust, nature would find a way to put life back on the planet. And nature is doing that with this virus. If you just leave it alone, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then you just let nature take its course, this would have been over. Last year, it would have been over, right? If you just let nature do her evolution thing, do the natural process thing, even do the spiritual thing, nature will fix it. And then, I want to show people something, because I think ignorance, sorry, I'm just going to try and search for this.
Okay, while you find it, I'll go on the philosophical thing too.
Yes.
And I'll say, well, first of all, we don't know any of this is real. It might all be entirely imaginary, but one of the ways I keep hope alive right now, there's a really good book called The Anarchist Handbook, which is different than the Anarchist Cookbook. That's about making bombs. But there's an essay from, I think it was 1850, and he pointed out that every time that governments take control and authoritarians try to take control of people, more freedom happens on the other side. And so this is how I keep hope now. Every time I watch them do something, I think this is waking some more people up to what they're doing, and more freedom is going to happen on the other side of this thing. And
that reminds me of Star Wars and the Force, and it's just like when it's uneven, like massively uneven, there's going to be a rebalancing of it. So nature doesn't like when things are unbalanced. So yeah, that's what I basically think of. I'm just like, we're headed for a serious rebalancing here. So yes.
Oh yeah,
and so just while we're waiting for Dr. Daniel to kind of get his what he's looking for going, just to pass it back to Kim or Jamie, did you guys have any other questions that you wanted to bring up before we get this kind of wrapped up? We've had you guys for a bit here, so we don't want to take up too much more of your time here. But yeah, so if you want to put that in, if you guys have any questions there.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being here, and not just here tonight, but on this earth plane in this now moment when humans need us the most. We need you standing forward and speaking your truth. You pretty much answered everything. Quick question though. When the NIH has left it open for doctors to make their choice, why and how are pharmacists overriding that? And why are they telling them what they can and cannot prescribe?
Well, they shouldn't be telling people what they can and cannot try to heal themselves. And I know because I have spoken to the pharmacist who did supply me the ivermectin in Rimby. He's been basically put under a gag order by the Alberta College of Pharmacists. They said they would stop investigating him and shutting down his pharmacy if he kept quiet. Simple as that.
I don't know what your audience is, but if you want to go full conspiracy, you have Dr. Charles Hoff in Lytton, who blew the whistle on the vaccines with his patients.
How's he doing? I heard Lytton
burned down.
Yeah.
And I also heard, I haven't confirmed this for sure, but that he had property in Monty Lake, which also burnt down. And if you've heard, what you've seen in the news about the fires and the climate change stuff going on in BC is all government propaganda. They actually deliberately made these fires worse this year.
So did they catch anyone like setting fires? Like people running around the bushes with cans of...
No, not that.
Because there was supposedly that happening in California.
Yeah, not that happening, but Monty Lake, there was a fire suppression or a structure suppression unit 20 minutes away from Monty Lake. They never got called in. And they're sitting there waiting. They're like, why aren't you calling us in? Like, we'll come in and we'll save these.
They saw the smoke.
Structures. I know.
They saw the smoke on Charles Hoff's property.
Yeah.
And no one called them in.
And
this was first to me.
Yeah, and I know, like, when Lytton, like when the town burnt down, the fire was almost out. They were doing back burning. They pulled the helicopters off and they let the fire flare up again. There was loggers building berms and they back burned while they were still building the berms. Like there's more to this, and I think it comes down to the climate change thing a lot of the time, and the virus is a bit of a distraction, and I think there's something worse coming. And I think, not to get on the dark winter conspiracy theory too much, but I think it is going to be it's going to get worse before it gets better, but it is going to get better.
Yes.
Well, here's something. I don't. Am I able to screen share? I just want to play this.
We can cut it in afterwards.
Okay, cut it in after.
Yeah.
So this is the link that I posted on the chat, and it's the NASA, and the title is misleading. It says carbon emissions from fires 2003 to 2018. But the thing is, a satellite can't tell whether carbon's coming from a forest fire, a wildfire, or a city. And I want people to watch that video and download it if you have to. Watch it in high resolution and try and pinpoint the largest cities that humanity has ever made on the planet. Look at that video and compare the scale, because then you have the scale. It's like gigatons of CO2. Try and find the biggest cities on the planet on that map. They won't even show up as a pixel. Yeah. Because the carbon cycle, and we're not just talking carbon cycle, we're calling the fire carbon cycle, is so huge on the planet. We are literally less than ants compared to like the planet's natural cycles. But then the other amazing thing, you watch that video, right? And it's a planetary view of wildfires. And what you'll notice is the same places that burn down, that have these massive 1,000 gigaton fires, 6 years later, the same place burns again. And then 6 years later, the place burns again. And then you ask, how can the same place burn over and over again? Because as much carbon as released during the wildfire, nature grows that all back. Like, when you look at the size of nature on a planetary scale, you're like, you are really humble. You are humbled on a spiritual level. And you're like, you know what?
If we're getting off topic on your show, let us know. But one of the, and again, you watch how the marketing happens. Do you remember when the Amazon was burning down a few years ago?
Oh, yeah.
And it was all because the Brazilian president said to slash burn for cows. Mm-hmm. What that was doing was building a link in our brains between
beef
mm-hmm. and CO2. And I read a PBS article where they explained it, and they're like, if the entire Amazon disappeared, we'd still have a lot of oxygen on our planet for thousands of years. We don't want the Amazon to burn down, but this was a marketing ploy. And I'm in software and data analytics and SEO. I understand it. Did any of you notice a while ago where the UK was going to have meat shortages?
Yeah,
about a month ago. Yeah. And the reason for the meat shortages was CO2. Do you remember why it was CO2? No. So what it was there's high fuel prices, and the fertilizer companies generated CO2, which was used for the bolt guns to kill the animals and for packaging. And so it was maddening to watch. The articles said there's meat shortages and CO2 was in there 35 times, and it didn't make sense in the article. This is an SEO thing, and it's trying to build a link in people's brains between CO2 and meat. And I don't care what you eat. I'm a libertarian. Like, put whatever you want in your body. That's your personal choice. I don't know you. But when they're trying to manipulate this and push us in that direction, there's something wrong there. And again, the libertarian perspective, like, this vaccine could be the 100% proven most effective vaccine that will save the entire planet. You still shouldn't be forcing it on people. And if CO2 is actually causing the planet to die, which I don't necessarily agree with, forcing us and manipulating us into this thinking is not the way to do it. Governments should not be manipulating our thoughts. They should be presenting information. I think there shouldn't be any role of government other than to protect our personal liberties. A lot of people would disagree with that.
Let me be a devil's advocate here. How much of that is because we've chosen to be ignorant? We're not being vigilant. Like, no one wants to read the laws. No one, like, I read that whistle stop judgment on Judge Germain, and it's not fun reading a judge's judgment. It's not fun reading the law. It's I'd rather much be doing something else. But I think if we stop doing our jobs, which part of our job is actually watching the people who govern us and holding them accountable, right? If all of a sudden the politicians are like, okay, fourth wave is over, go back to your business, and then everyone goes back to their business and doesn't hold the doctors, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, Alberta Health Services, what is it in Ontario? The big health authority. CPSO, that's CPSO. Oh, they make me mad. What they did to that pediatric immunologist, that was awful. Like, that is criminal, right? Yeah. Some doctor in Vancouver Island writes a complaint about a CPSO member, a pediatric immunologist who knows way more about what she's talking about in immunology than this doctor on Vancouver Island. And then the CPSO judges against, was it Dr. Kulvinder Gill? Was that her? I hope I'm remembering her, but it was just absolute flabbergasted.
And I think with everything, it's personal accountability for health, for government. Norbert from liberty.com, he said to me one day, he's like, am I part of the problem because I disengaged from politics and I didn't vote and I thought it wasn't important? And I think yes and no. There wasn't an opportunity for somebody out there, but nobody does read the acts. Like, we were talking about the Infants Act in BC. The Infants Act is what Dr. Henry is using to tell children they don't need their parents' consent. And the act is actually 2 paragraphs, and there's a very clear paragraph in there that talks about informed consent. And there's no way that a nurse injecting a child is giving informed consent. And the problem is that Dr. Henry led with this. She said, the Infants Act exists. Children, you don't need to ask your parents or even talk to them about it. And to me, that's a problem. The reason why laws exist is really for, in my mind, protecting personal liberties. And the Infants Act was created because there are situations where there are children who are actually capable of making bodily autonomy decisions for themselves without their parents' consent. And so an example is their appendix is bursting and their parents don't believe in surgery. That child says, I understand what's happening. I give consent for you to take the appendix out. And so that is maybe a good reason to have a law. But when the health authority comes out and says before children are even getting injected, you don't need this, and then sending letters out to parents telling them this, I have copies of these letters, that is a problem with government. And I think the only way we get out of this is to try to help people see the marketing that's happening by the government, and helping them see where these logical fallacies.
I think people need to take names of every single politician, every single member of the CPSO, right, that is rendering illogical, unscientific decisions. And the long-term plan is literally Nuremberg again. Everyone who was involved in making decisions that harm the bodies of other people,
For sure.
they need to be held accountable. And I think we're at the name-taking stage. We were just letting the politician know. It's like, how did you vote when this idea of locking down and shutting people's businesses down? What was your action when that came to the table, when that came to legislature? How did you vote, right? And who was influencing your vote? Just get as many names as possible.
Well, in BC, the provincial election that happened in October, and it was very brilliant strategically by John Horgan to do it. He actually now has it that our election is always going to happen at the same time as the U.S. election, when people are very distracted.
Most distracted. Right?
And it's a brilliant strategy. I think it's disgusting. I lost it, but yeah.
Actually, this is a great point to be able to kind of cut in. So we've had this going for an hour and a half. This has been fantastic talking with you guys. You guys are both a complete wealth of information on different spectrums as well too, of where you guys come from in terms of your background and where you're at. You guys, like I said, clearly fully informed, and we do appreciate you coming on here and just being able to kind of go through with us where your knowledge originated from, where it's kind of taken you, and your points of view in terms of everything that's going on right now. It's been really interesting, and I'm thinking that we would probably want to have you guys back on in the future. Maybe even just not that you guys aren't a good duo together, you guys are fantastic, but even separately, that way we can really focus in on both of you guys' benefits in societal, especially well, I'm not going to say especially both of you, but we really focus more on you, the doctor, today, and your kind of experience with everything. But I'd love to have you again on, Keith, as well too, just to go through the Libertarian Party and what you guys represent, and getting more into that, because I really think that people need to be more aware of their options when it comes to voting, and that there are other parties out there that have maybe more of your best interests at heart, especially given what we've seen from our parties, where you have like the Conservative Party trying to say that they're pro vaccine mandates. It's just like, what the hell is going on anymore? And so, we don't have representation the way we should, and people need to be more aware of the representation that there is already for them, that's right there, and they don't even know it. So just to kind of, just to get into the kind of last few minutes of this, I do know, Dr. Daniel, that you have some plans in terms of conferences that you're doing, and same thing with you, Keith. I wasn't sure if there's anything that you're working on right now that you'd like our viewers to know about. That way we can kind of give you a bit of a plug here at the end to let them know of what you guys got going on.
Yeah, on my end, we're just trying to build up the party for the next election. One of the things we're focusing on, we're not making it too public yet because we're really trying to help this one employee, but BC Hydro puts political beliefs in their vaccine mandate as a potential exemption. And I'm fundamentally against exemptions, but this is pretty unprecedented what's happening. So libertarian beliefs are very much on the non-aggression principle. I don't believe that I should slap you on the back without your permission, much less pierce your skin. So I think the only political belief that is possible, because political parties generally don't have any core values, is our party. So we're hoping to help this one person. We've got an exemption letter. I'm personally signing it for anybody who has a mandate, in the hopes that it helps. I unfortunately, I don't think that it will. doing a podcast next week on liberty.com. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, lrbrti.com. He does it out of this space sometimes. We're focusing on homeschooling and helping give parents solutions. When BC brought in their mask mandates, a lot of parents they started pulling their kids out of schools and trying to protect their children from getting vaccinated, because they will use the Infants Act to vaccinate children without their parents' consent. That's what we got going on right now.
Awesome. Well, we're putting all of our links in the description, as well as we have it kind of thrown up on here. But so anybody who's looking for any of the links for anything that was talked about, we're going to be putting those up in the description as well. And you said that so Dr. Daniel, you're I believe it was again with the Western Standard, you said that you were doing a conference. I'm not sure if that's already passed by this point, or if you have anything coming up that you want to talk about in the last few minutes here.
So I mentioned on the Western Standard, that conference was the freedomtalk.ca conference. So I'll just type it in here, Freedom Talk.
And again, we'll share these links with our viewers here in the description.
And that's already come and gone. And then I'm talking at a couple conferences in Alberta. I won't disclose the locations because, well, not until after the conference. Yep. But I'm speaking this weekend in Alberta at 2 different locations. And hopefully the videos will come up soon, and there'll be a lot to talk about. Because I think, this is way more than just me, one medication, one doctor working in a hospital. I think there's a systemic issue that people need to use their minds, observation, and intelligence to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and we have to have these in-person interactions. So this was a random happenstance. You were looking for liberty.com, and I was like, hey, let's talk. And here we are on a podcast. And I've been hosting meetups here, and whether they're tech or freedom or whatever, like, people have forgotten what it's like to actually talk in 3D with other people. And this is again the psychological operation, the trauma that's happened, and social media and podcasts and all these things are really important. I've personally taken a little bit of a break, and I'm trying to build up the core community and in-person things, because that's.
So I've spent a lot of time, since I'm not working, to think about philosophy, right? And one of the things that I realized is that when you have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, it is almost impossible for tyranny to take over society, right? Because when you have freedom of speech, when people speak something that's true, it gathers people together, because there's something innate in all men and women that when you see truth, you want to walk towards it. It's just one of those things. I don't know why. It seems like it's true. So whoever's speaking it, you want to gather around them, right? And so that's why freedom of speech is so important. Because if someone's not speaking truth, people will eventually just ignore it. It's not an issue. But if someone's speaking truth, then people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic statuses, all different cultures, when people see truth, everyone gathers. And when people gather, if there is some bad ruler or some bad oligarchy trying to do bad things to all people, that's usually a tyranny. And people gathering together is what stops tyranny in its tracks. Tyranny cannot cause genocide. Tyranny cannot cause mass murder if people gather together. And that's why it's so sinister that we've been prevented from gathering and we've been prevented from speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well, I think that's all by design. They've gotten rid of everywhere that a revolution has ever started, a church, tavern, all of this stuff. They're doing more than just trying to cripple our economy. They're trying to break our human spirit. We're masked up so you don't see emotional connection with your fellow man and woman. We're 6 feet apart. putting us out of our aura fields. They're locking us up, so we're isolated, segregated, separated, so we're not connecting at all. So I'm just going to wrap up the whole show here. We've gone overboard, a little over time that we normally do, but I mean, well worth it. You guys are just a lot of knowledge coming out, a very good perspective and viewpoint. So I'm going to kind of hit on a bunch of the topics and just wrap it up. So it's been very funny because as children, whenever we watched chicken pox go around, our parents would put us together and they would make sure that we got the chicken pox so that we could get immunity. And I was saying right from the beginning of all this, but whether you know, right at the beginning, there's that whole virus coming out. And I was like, how do you stop a virus? It's impossible. You can't prevent nature. So why wouldn't we just all try and contract it, deal with it, you know, and get over it? And again, we would have been done this whole thing by now. So these are indications that there are sinister events that are definitely happening. The forest fires that were happening in BC, they went all across northern Canada, all the way through into Ontario. And it was almost like they were trying to take out some of the self-sufficient communities and drive us back into the cities. They didn't seem to be wanting to put the fires out. They just let them go, get the carbon levels up. This way they can blame global warming. There's much more of an agenda than just this COVID virus. You know, we got the climate change, you know, threatening of food shortages. Whether these things come into fruition or not, they're posing a threat, and it's a battle of our mind. So we all know that this is a battle within consciousness. They're trying to break us through our minds. So this is the most important thing, is to stay as strong as we can. And I've been promoting since about March to get into groups, physical groups where you're sitting face to face. So I'm involved in several groups, and then any of the neighboring communities around me, as they start to get together, I will go out there. I will help them the best I can. I've been telling all the members to go to each group, neighboring community, because the way we're going to win this, and they know it, is we have to get back involved. As a community, we have to pay attention. And the best system that I'm looking at is creating a council or elders or whatever you want to call it to guide your community, be involved with your community, get back to raising your children by the village and not by the parents and everybody else has to sit on the waistline. We need to be involved with our community, see what's going on, see what's happening politically, medically, all of the systems in effect, get back involved in that. Go back to the early 1800s where everyone was involved. When there was a town meeting, everyone showed up because everybody had an interest. This is where we have to go again. This is what we got to do. And this is how we get our freedom back. And this is where we really knit our community very tightly together again. So, and for the two of you, the three of us are business owners. So right in the first, from the first of this year, we all opened up against all of the regulations. We stood our ground. We're involved in an organization called We Are Essential that has been empowering businesses, helping us stand. So that's where we're heavily involved in. I've worked with many different associations and individuals to try and push a lot of these messages forward to empower people, get them standing up. And we have to be able to lean on each other and trust each other. So we're going back to the roots, the grassroots. The way we fix this is not top down. We got to go grassroots, bottom up. And the way we do that is we start in our own community. We start with self-governing. We govern ourselves, and I couldn't agree with you more, Keith. You know, we have to start with ourselves, right, and make ourselves better, and then work with the community to make the community better and keep our own interests at heart, but be able to be flexible to work with each other. So, so again, we are part of We Are All Essential. So I encourage all business owners that are out there. We're willing to support you. Come join our network, weareallessential.ca. Also,
I'm a member.
Are you? Perfect.
Yes.
And we also want volunteers. The more shoulders to carry this, the better. And as I said, I'm involved with many different people. I've worked with so many across Canada. I've been working with from BC to Ottawa. Quebec's a little harder to get into. I got a couple of people in there that I've been working with. East Coast, not so much, but eventually they'll start to really rise. So Again, thank you for your time. That was an amazing conversation. None of us wanted to ask you questions. We were just so intrigued with everything you were saying. So it was great. It was great. We had to literally pry in to kind of interrupt you where we didn't want to. But thank you so much for your time. Again, I couldn't agree with Jessica more. I think we'll have to get you each individually on the show so that we can pick your brain on your specific topics. So thank you so much, and everybody have a great night. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.